Today I'm gonna make a review about this book called Notes from the Underground. It is one of my all-time favorites, if not my very favorite. It is, very well known by Fyodor Dostoyevsky. To be quite honest, I don't believe that anybody watches this review before having heard of Dostoyevsky prior to my review, or even having read the book before, but I'm going to give my honest review of it either way. Fyodor Dostoyevsky, a very accomplished Russian writer, or Soviet, let's keep it simple, let's just call it Russian, with multiple novels that were praised across the centuries and still offer a lot of insight to this very day. Notes from the Underground being one of the most noteworthy writings of his. What is this book about? Well, this book is the story about the underground man, the protagonist that we will be hearing about. He speaks in first person, so we are, from the very beginning, we are introduced to this man that has a very low self-esteem or very pitiful views in regards to the world and himself as well. He is constantly critical and very pessimistic, and it shares a very interesting resemblance, at least to me personally. This type of man really resembles what modern people would define as an incel, which is quite funny, but he does have very incel-y vibes. So the underground man is a very pitiful man, very antisocial, very recluse. He describes himself as somebody who is weak, who is ill, and he regards himself as being very intelligent as well. That's one of the qualities that he distinguishes himself upon. He believes that he has this higher intellect or comprehension of the world in regards to his peers or people in his surroundings, and he sees them as less intellectually, but he does simultaneously he does acknowledge the fact that that same intellect or regarding of awareness of political or psychological or social or whatever issues that may be, he regards himself as more knowledgeable about. This same estimation by himself does drag him down in a hole. It pulls him towards this little cave that he cannot really escape from, and it's really kind of like a prison in his own mind, because it all really depends on his own perspective. So it's very interesting, especially for people who have more of an introverted nature and perhaps were more recluse or more antisocial growing up. I think this does ring a few bells, and it brings up a few red flags, and it does really intensify the persona of an antisocial man that believes himself to be better than others, and it kind of brings to full fruition this concept, kind of like the apex incel, one may say as well. So already when you start reading the book, it doesn't take that much long for the reader to feel spiteful towards the main character. Maybe spiteful is not the word, but you do feel a sense of rejection of the character, and the more it progresses, you start to empathize with his ideas, but not necessarily with his actions in regards to it. And this is a very interesting dichotomy that the book offers, that it presents very good arguments for the way that this man thinks, but his actions don't really match up to it. And on top of everything, it really displays how his management of these thoughts and actions are really to his self detriment, and perhaps even to a certain extent purposeful. He does these things because he wants to be worse off. I find it very interesting, and the fact that it was written centuries ago, mind you, before psychology was a field. This was way before Sigmund Freud. It precedes even Nietzsche. I believe Nietzsche actually mentions this book in one of his writings as well, one of his letters that he sent to somebody else. So this precedes Nietzsche, it precedes Freud, and you can make the link there, right? Freud, Nietzsche, Dostoyevsky. It's a little bit of a stretch, but you can still make the correlation. Regardless of that, yeah, you read the book, you feel kind of like this rejection towards the main character. He does not cease to surprise by how profoundly inept he is in social interactions and reading the room, and much more so when he does acknowledge that he is bad at this, and especially when he does read the room, but he does the exact opposite of the things that ought to be done in order to be rejected socially. At least that's my reading of it. Later on throughout the novel, he does present himself in certain situations where one might be familiarized with. Definitely not a book for the people who peaked in high school, by any means, not at all. But it does ring a few bells across time. He's a deeply non-confrontational man as well, so he presents all these aspects of a very unattractive person. You know, he's very coward-like. He is very bitter in regards to other people. He regards himself to have a higher intellect than the rest. He does not really focus on self-improvement of any sort. He just recurs to criticizing. And while he can come across as a somewhat intellectually, I wouldn't say proficient, because he doesn't have any showing of that necessarily, but more intellectually inclined person, it doesn't necessarily seem to be one of his fortes. It doesn't illustrate as something that can be to his benefit. Actually, quite the opposite. So that is very interesting as well. The very important or very curious thing about Dostoevsky's novels is how much psychological insight that he had in regards to his novels, his character writing. He had a very deep comprehension of the psyche way before psychology or psychotherapy or therapy, well, way before Freud, which one could argue wasn't necessarily the father of psychology, but he was the first one to implement psychotherapy. Despite being centuries before that, he does make a very good job at expressing the nature of the actions of characters and writing them as very realistic as well. And something very interesting about Dostoevsky is that he does have an element of recklessness in his novels. Notes from the Underground doesn't necessarily have recklessness in it, but it does have points where it seems a little bit irrational just due to the actions of the protagonist. So, an incredibly good book. I have it in very bad conditions because I've read it time and time again. I wouldn't like to spoil too much about it because it's not that long. I wouldn't say it's not necessarily easy reading. I wouldn't catalog it as difficult to read either. I believe that if you pay enough attention, you know, you might need to reread a few times some pages, but the reading of it isn't necessarily complicated. It's much more so tedious. To me personally, It's a book where you can sit down. I enjoyed it while smoking a cigar, as pretentious as that may seem. It really does combine fairly well in an old-fashioned manner, but it does very well as well. I would rate this book. I think it does have to go towards the pedestal. I think it deserves a 10 out of 10, just because of the incredibly insightful piece of literature that we have here, how it transcended over time, how meaningful that it was for literature and for comprehension in terms of psychology, right? The insight, the delicateness, also the nature, the form of the writing. It doesn't necessarily have a beginning or an ending to it. You know, while it does begin introducing the character, it's not like it gives you a full background of the character. While it does say some where he comes from and what he did, but it doesn't even give you the name of the character. So what this really is notes from the underground. This is a diary of somebody writing down his experiences, and it doesn't. This is not the beginning of the diary. This is like one of the collections of the fictional diaries, a piece of the diary of this man, this tortured man. And again, it doesn't begin or end, at least in my estimation. It does not end, but I don't consider that it begins either. It's just a piece of the collection, and that is, it just shows how original and radical Dostoyevsky was in his writing. Again, yeah, just because of how incredibly insightful it is psychologically, how it transcends across time as well, because these issues don't really they don't really age as much. These are things that we can still see today, 200 years later. I believe that the ability to pinpoint what the essential issues of social interaction, or rather of an antisocial person, right? To be able to pinpoint what it meant or why it was the way it was, and to illustrate it in such a fluent manner, and to maybe in some occasions make a person empathize in a very strange fashion, because you're not really rooting for the character here. I believe that the ability to illustrate that just is another reason as to why many people hold Fyodor Dostoyevsky as one of the greatest writers of all time, if not the greatest. 10 out of 10. Honestly, I think it's not too long. It's not too complicated. It holds a lot in much less than that one would think. Yeah, fantastic book. I recommend it. It's not a book for everyone. Again, it's not for the people who peaked in high school, but I do wish that everybody could read this and give it a try. I don't think it's for everybody, but for those who are interested, it's an extremely insightful book, and it can actually, due to the rejection that one might have towards the main character, it might actually push you to improve yourself and to not be like the underground man. So yeah, Notes from the Underground, 10 out of 10.